Dogman versus one ticked off polar bear. Dear Scary Stories NYC. I used to go on adventure vacations back when you had to plan them all yourself. My adventure partner, we'll call Frank, and I were once hiking toward the northern coast of Alaska when we ran into a dogman being chased and battered in a snowstorm by a very large, nearly giant polar bear. We then followed this battle as it raged across the landscape, eventually tearing through a snow-covered college campus where we lost track of the two behemoths. If you want to know who won the fight, I'm going to tell you right off the bat, it was never really a true fight. It was that huge polar bear chasing that dog-headed werewolf man. The only times that the dog really even made attacks were when he needed to create some space between the two immense carnivores so that he could try to make a getaway. We'll get into every detail I can recall about what they looked like and the ways they fought and ran and moved. I'm telling you right up front, though, that I didn't see how it ended, or if the dogman got away, and some of the more violent parts are only going to be in the uncensored version of the story, which is available to channel members and PayPal Club members as well. You should either have gotten an email about it, or be able to find the link on our community page, or if you're in one of this channel's monthly clubs. But we'll tell you the main part of the story here, just in a more advertiser-friendly kind of a way. Frank and I had been staying with these very eccentric young men who were building small habitable homes in the middle of the Alaskan wilderness and going on treks from there in various locations. We offered to assist their construction efforts for free in exchange for food and a place to sleep. I at first took them to be scientists, as they seemed to be carrying on some kind of laboratory experiments in one of the buildings. After a few days, I realized I couldn't understand any of their motivations, and so we decided to continue our trek northward. Before we left, though, their leaders called us into one of the structures and gave us a stern lecture that Alaska was much wilder than is officially known. We got warned about all sorts of dangers unknown to the mainstream. According to these fellows, we were probably going to encounter spirits who seemed something like the jinn of Arab countries. Magical demons who had no real form, but who could appear to look however they wanted. We were told that they most often appear as creatures who are crossed between man and animals, like an oversized bat, or a four-legged animal capable of getting up and walking around on his hind legs. Frank and I had no idea what to make of that bizarre sermon we received, as we couldn't tell how much of what the guy said came from real experience, how much came from legend, and how much came out of whatever it was they seemed to be brewing in that laboratory. Once we left, Frank and I would find something that I suppose might have matched the description of one of these supposed spirits. The only thing was, he appeared to us completely physical, and he seemed to be in the middle of losing a battle with a creature that I'm nearly 100% certain was natural and normal. Now in those days, and this would have been the mid-1990s, we navigated using the stars, compasses, and by asking people directions. We did each carry a paper map tucked away somewhere in our backpacks, but if we actually had to stop and take that out, it was usually bad news. I think this all happened around the time that GPS was becoming used commercially, but we didn't carry satellite devices with us until the 2000s. I don't remember why, but we just didn't. I guess it took us a few years to comprehend their immense value, and I would never go out into the wilderness, any wilderness, let alone Alaska these days, without some kind of GPS tracking device on me. It's incredibly useful in case you get lost or injured, but this story happened way back in the olden times, so we were largely winging it. Nevertheless, we were hiking very, very north to extraordinarily north in Alaska, heading toward that coastline way up near the top of the world. For some reason, I had always envisioned it as a climb up to the north of the planet, but of course that's a head game, resulting from looking at too many maps and globes and not enough of Alaska itself. Although both our Alaskan adventures were fraught with setbacks and problems and accidents, I'm really grateful that we got to go on them while we still could when we were young. The fact that we almost didn't live to be old because of them doesn't really matter, since we did make it through, at least in the timeline we currently inhabit. When you're that far north on the planet Earth, it's day for a really long time, then night for a really long time afterward. Frank and I would try to get 8 hours of lying in the tent with masks over our eyes to simulate darkness, no matter what was actually happening in reality. We had initially planned on arriving in July, which is the warmest month up there as down here, until we found out that the sun literally doesn't set then. So we went toward the end of August going into September. At that time, there are at least a few hours of darkness per day, and night grows a bit longer as you head into the long dark winter. That time of year is the complete opposite of the Alaskan summer. It really did feel like a voyage to another planet, both times I went up there. Maybe that's why, when we ran into that huge dogman or werewolf creature being chased by the most savage-looking polar bear on record, we found it intensely interesting, but not exactly surprising. I've seen TV shows and movies that tried to capture that feeling of pure strange that exists up there. But I think you have to be out in the snow for days, trying to keep warm and dry, fighting hard for simple survival, and then have some weird Alaskan thing happen to you for you to really get it. It's not just surreal up there in a David Lynch kind of way. It's much more in your face than that. It isn't just spooky watching from your couch and eating popcorn. It is truly inexplicable happening to you when you're tired and achy from a long hike and you have no time for the surreal. In the Alaskan wilderness, the mystery of the world is in full control, and you try to humbly navigate it until you get yourself back out to the normal world. While you're in there, you should be prepared for the impossible to suddenly, and even blandly, become extremely possible. And so it was on that one day. We thought we were walking toward the north in a very light snow. Suddenly the two beasts appeared ahead of us to our right, the one chasing the other. At first, all we saw were silhouettes through the falling snow. The one leading the charge was dark, and the one in the rear looked yellowish against that snow. Both ran down on all fours, like giant cats or dogs of some kind. It was impossible at first to make out details, but we immediately knew that both creatures were large, quadrupedal, and quickly heading in our general direction. There was nothing to duck down behind, but I suppose our survival instincts took over, so Frank and I dropped down to make ourselves smaller. I literally hid behind my backpack, peeking out like a coward. I thought two large carnivores were running over to eat us. I saw them as both running together, not so much the one chasing the other. As they drew closer, though, it became clear that was in fact what was happening. It was the light-colored one chasing the dark one. And this was where we were beginning to see what these two beasts in fact were. In the lead of the two-figure parade was a kind of an animal or man unlike any I had ever seen before, outside of maybe movies or nightmares. It looked a lot like the modern image of the Dogman, but that was not something I was yet familiar with then. It looked grayish-black, but it also looked as though its fur were drenched, and that would cause it to appear darker. Second in line was a yellow polar bear that was larger than any I'd ever seen before. I did not, in fact, know that they grew so big. In that environment on that day, I thought I was seeing an 11 or 12-foot bear when it would briefly stand on its hind legs to swipe at the Dogman. When the canine man, who nearly always stood on his hind legs, would be on higher ground, he was sometimes eye level with the bear. So I would say it was probably between 1.5 to 3 feet shorter, let's say around 2 feet less tall than the obviously enraged polar bear when both were standing. The bear seemed equally content to be down on all fours, attacking the Dogman in its soft, exposed belly or even areas below the belt. This was not an officially sanctioned boxing match, obviously. This was a battle to the death between two of the most savage carnivores or omnivores I can even imagine. What could have angered the bear so much that it would pursue this canine man across some of the harsher terrain in Alaska? It was clearly seething with fury on a kind of a level that I never saw in my life again. At least, not until I witnessed some of the political discussions people have been having since 2016. No, seriously though, something had set this polar bear off in a way that was not ordinary. I wondered what horrible thing that Dogman must have done to start this fight in the first place, since I was immediately certain he had started it. Had he stolen food from the mountainous bear? Had he done something terrible to one of the bear's offspring? In some ways, this large dark thing with the tall pointed ears resembled an earthbound Satan. But in other ways, it seemed like the big bad wolf from a 20th century cartoon show. Like the one from Roadrunner, or the other from the Three Little Pigs, you know? Only this had come to life in an uglier and more realistic form. Even as it ran from the bear, it would turn and defiantly bellow at him, and even hiss, in this manner that reminded me more of a cat than a canine or a jackal. Frank said he thought the Dogman hissed like a snake, and I guess that would be another way to look at it. As we initially ran into the creatures, the land shifted upward toward the north for a ways. The Dogman would climb a bit, then turn and hiss and shout and generally act scary. The bear would then catch up to him, slap him upside his head 1 or 12 times, and the Dogman would retreat a bit to even higher ground. From there, he would then again shout at and hiss and wave his scary claws in the air at the bear, who once again was just not intelligent enough to understand that he should be frightened of the Dogman. Maybe it's because the bear was clearly consumed with rage, while the Dogman was only angry. Or maybe it was because of his intelligence level, but that polar bear was not in any sense frightened by the Dogman, and in every sense appeared to desperately desire to witness the creature's demise as soon as possible. When I read people now in the 21st century saying that Dogman has a way to hypnotize you into being more scared of him than you would be of anything else, I wonder if Frank and I observed evidence of maybe just that. After all, we were both awed and stunned by what we were witnessing. But I would say that most of our outright fear ended when we saw that the two beasts were busy attacking each other, and therefore had no interest in us. It seemed to me that the Dogman was continually, over and over, trying to make the bear frightened of him, so maybe it actually is a defense mechanism that he can use. Maybe it only works against humans and other more intelligent species, though. Maybe it's not a primal kind of fear that can translate into the polar bear nervous system. Or another possibility might be that the furious anger the bear was experiencing was blocking out or superseding any attempt to frighten it that the Dogman tried to make. If that turned out to be true, then feeling an extreme emotion of anger might actually protect you from the Dogman if you encounter one who is trying to intimidate you into a fear reaction. By the way, I think this applies to both the more supernatural theories about the Dogman and the more naturalistic theories. It might be using a kind of hypnosis and thought interference or control in order to feed off the victim's fear, as some paranormal Dogman enthusiasts claim. It might also be a natural animal hoping to frighten and intimidate its victim merely to make them nervous and easier to catch. I think in either case it might act a lot like this creature was attempting to act toward its ursine pursuer. So I don't know if our story provides any evidence for either side of the argument. It did try to scare the polar bear. Did it do it to eat the fear? Or just to scare the beast out of the idea of continuing its pursuit? I don't know if I can tell you either way. Needless to say, we were in Alaska to have an adventure, so we decided we had to follow after the two large animals and see the rest of the battle if we could. I remember Frank checking his compass because we were of the opinion that the animals were heading toward the west. In fact, they were running northward, and we had somehow in the snow gotten so turned around that we were walking eastward. That taught us to check the compass far more frequently, believe me, as we now really had no idea where we even were. Since the Dogman and bear were heading almost due north, it made all the sense in the world to follow after them. We debated setting up camp and waiting out the storm each time it got bad, but each time we almost pitched a tent, the wind and snow would let up a little, and we'd continue our trek. Eventually, we made it to a corner of a human settlement. My first thought when seeing it was that this was the set of the TV show MASH, but up in the Alaskan snow. So when we drew closer, we saw people milling about, maybe a dozen of them or so. Going up and talking to them, we found out that they had just seen the Dogman and the polar bear tearing through the edge of their campus. You see, this was the Isavik College, which bills itself as Alaska's only tribal college. The guys told us we only missed the creatures by about 20 minutes, as they had just crashed through. We asked for directions in order to continue following the beasts, but we were persuaded to come inside, have some warm food, and get some sleep in someone's room they lent us instead. Sometimes I regret not continuing the chase, but we were told that the next passage would be much harsher than the way we had come so far because the storm was only going to get far worse. That's another thing besides GPS that you should always keep your access to while in the wilderness. Weather reports. So I'm looking at Google right now, and the websites are telling me that polar bears grow to be 10 feet sometimes. So then this polar bear we saw was probably not a giant, but just very large. It might have been a bit over 10 feet when it stood up, but maybe it was right at 10 feet. If that were the case, then I would say the Dogman standing up must have been 8 feet, not 9. If either of them decided to chase us, I'm not sure that 1 foot of height difference would have been enough to save us. Then again, maybe this really was a larger than normal sized polar bear. Maybe it really was 11 or 12 feet. And maybe the Dogman really was 9 or 10. It's not like we can go back in time and ask them to each stand up next to a size chart for comparison. We did end up heading north to the shoreline, which we walked east to Prudhoe Bay, where we made arrangements to begin our journey all the way back to the Midwest, where our adventure had originated from. Yes, I'm a native of Wisconsin, and Frank moved there when he was in college, but we both had to travel to the northern edge of Alaska before we got to see a Dogman. I don't disrespect you if you disagree, but I do feel that cryptids are natural creatures, or at least natural enough that I do think they can be defeated by natural animals like polar bears, and maybe even humans too. Possibly if it ever reaches a point where the Dogmen turn on human civilization, we might have a chance to fight them back, after all. At least, that's how I've felt about it ever since that day in my young adulthood, when I witnessed the hectic chase between Dogman versus one ticked-off polar bear. Mary Shabazz goes first class. She's a monthly member with a $10 pass. Please join me in thanking Mary Shabazz, one of our top-tier channel members. She gets to see all our secret uncensored videos, and in fact, she gets to see the somewhat gorier version of this episode, which in fact is available even as you hear me speak these words. It's the same episode as this, but in the 2 fight scenes, you get to hear some bloodier descriptions than we can provide here. Most weeks, we have entire stories that we could never tell on this channel, for our channel members and PayPal members only. Mary Shabazz also has access to our over 25 hours of archived, secret, scary stories as well. Here to explain this and all the other ways you can help us stay online is our international TV spokesmongrel, Henry Lee Dogman. Hank? Thanks, Biggie. And thanks to all of you for watching this far. If you liked it, please click like. If you'd like to see more of our work, please subscribe. And also click that bell icon if you'd like to be notified when we put out a new episode. To become an executive producer, you can donate to us through the thanks button under each of our videos or through our paypal.me/PeterBernard209 page. To receive cool perks like secret uncensored Dogman episodes far too wild to ever run on this channel, you can become a YouTube channel member by clicking the join button, or join our PayPal subscribers club at peterbernard.com. Joining either at the $3 a month level or above gets you access to our over 25 hours of secret uncensored Dogman stories available nowhere else. Do you have a scary story about Dogman or some other kind of high strangeness that happened to you? Let us know by emailing us at scarystoriesnyc@gmail.com or by leaving us a voicemail message at 804-LA-SCARY. You may need to call back on that one. It cuts off after I think 3 minutes. And if you don't want to do any of that stuff, thank you for simply watching to the end. Good night, and have a scary tomorrow.
Come back for more scary stories.